Welcome back, Nalo Hopkinson. Delighted to have you here with us again. And today we are in Canada. Specifically, in your case, we are in Toronto, where you lived for a number of years. And that must have been a bit of a shock for you. I've been in Toronto in December in the snow, and it's not warm. It's not very Caribbean at all.
It really isn't. However, Toronto in December is really mild compared to Toronto in February. In December is when you get the lovely, pretty snowfalls, and the snow actually sort of muffles everything, and it feels less cold. I lived in Toronto for 35 years. Never did quite get used to being cold. When I moved there when I was 16, it was in the summer. And the very first winter we had, I thought, I know how to sew. I'm going to keep warm. I went out and I got some wool jersey, heavyweight wool jersey, but still jersey, which is kind of like t-shirt material, and made a pair of pants that were not lined, because what did I know? And I went outdoors the first time it went below zero, and I swear my bones froze cold. I didn't think it could get that cold. So yeah, that was always a bit of, it took some dealing with, 6 to 8 months out of every year. Yeah.
So what sort of temperatures would you get in February in Toronto?
It has gotten as cold as, I'm putting my brain back into Celsius. I've been living in the US for 9 years, and they're very much Fahrenheit. It could get as cold as, I've sometimes seen minus, I want to say 15.
Okay.
There were days where the first time that I went out of doors, took a breath in and thought, what's wrong with my nose? And it was because my nose hairs had frozen.
Yeah. Now, the reason I asked is that when you were in Toronto, I was in Melbourne. And February in Melbourne is the time when it gets above 40.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It does that in Toronto as well, with the humidity. So in the summer,
Right,
I have sometimes seen, because we're on the lake in Toronto, so you get
of
all
course.
that humidity washing up from the Great Lake, Lake Ontario. So I've sometimes seen squirrels hanging over branches, just trying to catch a breeze because they're dressed in little tiny fur coats, bless their hearts.
Poor little
I
things.
know. It's very
Oh,
sad.
dear. Yeah, so, I mean, my impressions of Toronto are it's just like an American city, but clean and tidy. Is that about right?
Yes and no. Definitely the cleaner or tidier aspects of it, and with an underground with subway. Um,
Well, we have one of those in San Francisco, so it's
that's true. That's true. But I guess it's the Canadian in me sort of going, no, not a lot like the US, not in the least. But if you're not from either Canada or the US, yes, it'll feel a lot like the US. Um, Social um, codes when you're out in public are a little bit different. Torontonians don't make eye contact. I guess because it's such a big city and there's so much jostling for space. You could say good morning and nobody will answer you. And that's actually considered, I think, polite to not be too much up in other people's spaces.
okay.
But yes, yeah, there is a certain Canadian flavor uh, to Toronto that you wouldn't find in U.S. cities.
Mm. How ethnically diverse is Toronto?
Very, very, very. We've taken over. It's
Oh,
when I was last paying attention to statistics, um, I believe it was that the city was going to be more than 50% um, people from elsewhere and people of color by the year 2000, and it's now well past that.
yeah.
Living here, I live in California right now. When I want mangoes, I go home to Toronto. And I go to where my mother lives in the suburbs, and she takes me to a big grocery store that imports all the foods from India, from China, from the Caribbean. Um, it's very, very diverse. It's there's any kind of food you could hope to name. Um, Walk down the streets in downtown Toronto, you'll hear all kinds of languages. The faces are from everywhere and in every stripe. It's one of the things that I really love about the city.
No, I've always ate reasonably well when I've been there, so I
Exactly.
can't complain really. Although
Yeah.
a lot of the time I've been staying in hotels for business because I have a client there, so
Ah,
a lot of
yeah.
my Toronto time has basically been work visits
Oh,
rather than tourism.
yeah. No, everything from PEI oysters to Trinidadian Julie mangoes. Just lovely.
Mm. Now,
Yes.
one of the things I've noticed about Toronto is that wherever you go, there are adverts for Victoria Falls.
Uh, really? No,
Yeah,
I've never noticed.
yeah, that's
But Victoria Falls, not Niagara
sorry,
Falls?
Niagara Falls. What am I talking
Okay.
about? Yes, Niagara Falls.
Okay.
Brain
Yes.
fed. Yes.
Yes, yes, for sure. Niagara Falls is, you can get there in just over an hour. Um, our side is prettier than the US side, but I think it actually is prettier than the US side. It is astonishing. Just the sheer power and size and the weird tidy bowl color of the water because it's being churned up, and just the sheer height of the falls. And you can go into, it's very much a tourist area. You can, there's a Ripley's Believe It or Not. You can see the photograph of the woman who went over the falls in a barrel. Um, it is both kitschy and just astonishing. It's also where the great Farini, when he was doing his first tightrope act, did it over the Niagara Falls, and he lost his balance halfway through, and was so frightened he caught himself and climbed back onto the rope. He was so frightened that he sort of hung there shaking, sat there on the rope shaking for about 20 minutes before he could continue.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of history there. Yes.
Now, the two other tourism things I've done in Toronto. One is the Royal Ontario Museum, which has some good dinosaurs. I understand it's nowhere near as good as dinosaurs you'll get out in Alberta and places, but
Alberta. Oh,
for
yeah.
me, it was very impressive in terms of dinosaurs. And the other
Yes.
one is the Inuit Art Museum.
The which art
The
museum?
Inuit
Oh,
Art Museum.
yeah. Just beautiful, beautiful work.
Mm.
Um, Almost sort of humbling work just in the sheer gravitas of it. The Royal Ontario Museum has a checkered past. They many years ago did an exhibit called Out of Africa that was basically artifacts that white people had stolen from Africa
Mhm.
and got quite picketed, and so have tried to pull up their socks ever since. The new Royal Ontario Museum was, I believe, paid for by a Chinese Jamaican businessman. Um, so I'm guessing you'll see some of that influence in it. I worked for the ROM for a summer with another exhibit that had brought together art, 3,000-year-old art from the Egyptian pyramids, and that was amazing. They do great work.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I remember going to see Mesopotamia exhibition there,
Yes.
and they
Yeah.
had some things that they borrowed from the British Museum and one or
Yes.
two other bits and pieces, including there's an amazing mural etched thing of a big garden, which some Assyriologists believe, although it's a site in Nineveh, some Assyriologists believe that's the origin of the legend of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, and that it's just the Greeks or Romans or whoever got the wrong city, as they
Yeah.
frequently did.
As they do.
Greek
Yes.
historians were completely useless writing about Mesopotamia. Um,
Not
they would get the
surprised.
wrong city and the wrong
Yes.
king and
And
goodness
they
knows what
think,
else.
oh, who would know? Who'd know the
Yeah,
difference? And so if you leave the ROM and walk right across the street, you will be in the Ceramics Museum, which
Ah,
is much smaller, but also does just beautiful, beautiful work. And their exhibits are astonishing. And there's something I love about material art. So there's that. You can sort of tootle back and forth between the two. Toronto is a great city for just doing stuff.
mm, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And of course, it has the Judith Merril collection, which is one of the
Yes,
biggest science fiction libraries in the world.
yes, yes, indeed. I actually went there in my early days in undergrad. I took a science fiction course, and it one week it happened at the it was then called the Spaced Out Library, um, and Judy was behind the desk. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great city from that point of view, and it's got its own science fiction bookshop at back of Phoenix. Margaret
Yes,
Atwood lives there. Guy Gavriel Kay lives there. So,
yes, yes. Yes, a great city for science fiction. Cory Doctorow was from there. So many people.
mm,
Silvia Morena Garcia is from there. Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
great.
yeah.
Hey, so any particular tourism things about Toronto that I've missed?
I would say Toronto Island.
Okay.
Um, I'm not sure if you can still go there now, but yes. So taking the ferry to
Yeah.
the Toronto Islands, which are in Lake Ontario, which used to be, I gather the islands used to be much further eastward, but were blown there in a series of storms. And finally, the city anchored them down with
Um,
landfill. Um, but Toronto Islands, there's a lagoon in the middle of one of them. There is a small uh, entertainment park center thing. There is Hanlon's Point. There is a nude beach, which has been the source of a lot of political action to make it be legally a nude beach, because people would just get arrested. Um, Largely gay men would get picked on,
oh, what a
being
surprise.
cruising on the nude beach.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Um, what else? Oh, theater. So much wonderful, wonderful theater. And theater there's a couple of black theaters there. Um, I used to work for the Toronto Arts Council as a grants officer, so it's going to be hard to limit myself. The Toronto International Film Festival happens there. Pretty much any month you care to go, there will be a lot to do.
Yeah. Now, you've set at least two of your books in Toronto's Brown Girl in the Ring and Sister Mine. Have I missed any?
Yes. Oh, who remembers? Let me see. A lot of my short stories have been set there too, but definitely Brown Girl in the Ring and Sister Mine. Brown Girl in the Ring being my first novel, and so I set it where I lived. Um,
Entirely
and
reasonable.
and I could still set it. I could still set it within the Caribbean community, because there is such an extensive Caribbean community in Toronto. Sister Mine was an amalgam. I somehow got the idea that the Trinidadian god of the forest would have been transplanted to Toronto as I was, and that his wife would be the lake monster, the Ontario lake monster.
Why
Um,
not?
yeah.
Talking of monsters, I should ask you about that fabulous necklace you're wearing. That looks like an alligator.
It's I believe either an alligator or a crocodile. I can't tell the difference.
Well, you're in
Um,
America. It's an alligator.
okay, sure. And I think it's a really, really cheap knockoff of something that probably cost 200 times as much, in its original form. But since I've been writing a comic for in the Sandman universe, I have been noticing extravagant costume jewelry that reminds me of my characters. So I have a character whose name is Uncle Monday, and he is a half half alligator, half man who comes from American folklore, and who originally came from Africa and was dedicated to a crocodile god. And when he got to America and sort of ran away from slavery, he, like many Africans did, ended up in First Nations communities where they took him in. And the Seminoles said, alligator God, crocodile God, we're cousins.
Yes. Oh, big teeth. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, big
All
reptile,
right.
scary
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Well, that's cool. Okay. Well, Nalo, thank you ever so much for coming to talk to me about both California and Canada. It's been an absolute
Oh,
delight to have you on this. And indeed, thank you for helping out 125.
most welcome. My pleasure. It is such a good cause. It's one I believe in. So thank you for asking me.